So tonight I'm going to talk about how you can escape the system. And when I say the system, I'm specifically talking about the magic of Yahweh. Now, I talk about Yahweh a lot, but that's because he is a busy motherfucker. So many of the institutions, so many of the cults that operate within modernity are either directly linked to the cult of Yahweh, or they are a symptom of the cult. And in terms of the spiritual nature of modernity, so much of it has been defined by that specific cult. Now, of course, modernity begins with Socrates. It begins with the age of the Vishuddhi, where the mind, the alchemical aspect of air, becomes dominant. And within this sphere, we begin with a positive manifestation of the Vishuddhi age, which is the increase in the power of imagination, the growth in the capacity of humanity to build things, to manifest, to work through a blueprint within the mind and act upon the material with that connection to the immanent aspect, the immanent expression of the mind, of Vishuddhi consciousness, which is what we began with in the infancy of modernity. But of course, with the march of time, decadence begins to set in. And decadence in modernity is defined by Abrahamism. It is defined by the cult of Yahweh. Because the solar aspect, the orderly aspect, the divine masculine within the age of the Vishuddhi, within modernity, as it existed within Athens, was a positive force because it brought new awareness to humanity in regards to what is possible if we access the deepest elements of the internal aspect, if we elevate man to the status of God, and we give man the tools to create a new world through technology, through industry, through innovation, the marketplace. All of these things were a positive manifestation in the beginning. Law, order, political institutions. These things were formed in order to create, to elevate man. But they were hijacked. They were hijacked by one specific deity, Yahweh. The cult of Yahweh, as it exists within its various forms, now defines the general atmosphere of our contemporary age. And it has defined the human condition on a macro scale for over 2,000 years. But in its beginning, it was a very small cult. It was a fringe cult. Yahweh was once a God that was part of a pantheon of an Aryan nature. And we know that in the cycle of time, the solar patriarch becomes decadent, rejects the Earth Mother, rejects Shakti, the divine feminine aspect, and becomes paranoid about threats to his power. And he becomes a tyrant. We see this in the mythology of every great Aryan tradition. I just recently gave a lecture on Gaia, Uranus, Cronus, and Zeus, and how there was this long succession of black sun usurpers taking power from the degenerate, tyrannical solar patriarch by forming a union with Shakti, or the divine feminine. In the Greek tradition, this was Cronus forming a relationship with Gaia to overthrow Uranus, and then Zeus forming a partnership with Rhea to overthrow Cronus. And it continues. And in these traditions, we find these unbroken lines of succession where when the solar patriarch becomes too powerful and becomes tyrannical, we have a revolution and a revitalization of the sun. In the Jewish tradition, we saw an example of the solar patriarch successfully shrugging off the pantheon. And with this, you have the formation of monotheism. The formation of Judaism begins with the cult of Yahwism. When the Jews were enslaved in Babylon, Yahweh came to the Jews and offered them a path to liberation if they would sacrifice worship of all other gods and submit only to Him. This is the foundation of monotheism. This is the foundation of our current age. This one moment in time when this group of very powerful people who had found themselves in a position of subjugation fell into desperation, and it was at this moment of desperation that this force, Yahweh, was presented to them as a means of escape. But of course, they left one prison and entered directly into another. Because the kind of liberation that was offered by Yahweh to the Jews was not Aryan liberation. It was not elevation of the self to brotherhood with the gods. It was not elevation of the self to godhood. Instead, it was submission for eternity. And a total sacrifice of the divine feminine aspect. A severing of Shakti. And so, this cult began to grow in power because of the intensity of worship, the absolute devotion, and the fact that the Jews were placed in conditions that forced them to act as masters. It's interesting because although they submitted to the will of Yahweh, they were granted a special status. They were granted rulership over the earth as a conduit, as a means of Yahweh expressing his power through the Jewish people. And so there's this interesting split right in the beginning where you have this cult of submission. However, within this cult of submission, you also have an occulted aspect. You have the leadership forming legion with Yahweh. Folding into the angelic aspect. A willingness to share power in submission, but acting in a seat of authority within the material world. And this is where the legalistic foundation of our current institutions begins. It is the granting of authority to a new priesthood, the priesthood of Yahweh, that would form the beginnings of all of the major churches, the Abrahamic churches that operate currently. So what we have here is an absolute degeneration of the Arian tradition. Because, as I said, in the Arian tradition, the goal is to form brotherhood with the gods. The goal is to self-deify. Within the Yahweh tradition, you can achieve power through a hierarchy, but ultimately you must submit to Yahweh. You cannot exist as a brother to Yahweh. You exist as a slave, ultimately, no matter where you rest in the hierarchy. And even if you are granted the permission to act with a mockery of master morality, it is still permission that you are being granted. It is legalistic. And this is not the fullest expression of power, which is offered by the Arian tradition, which was part of Yahweh's pantheon prior to his usurping of the entire system, throwing out of the divine feminine. So then you saw the growth of Judaism, and following that we have Christianity and Islam, and all of these new cults attracted the lowest common denominator. These cults were part of a massive uprising of broken people. People who were told that they no longer had to strive for greatness. All they had to do was submit to the will of this singular point, this singular source of authority, and they would be granted permission, certain benefits. Specifically, men were granted dominance over women. That is what allowed Yahwism to grow so quickly, because broken men who were afraid to compete, who were afraid to display their will, display their power, were given a legalistic system that allowed them to place women into slavery. This is the exoteric expression of Yahweh placing the divine feminine in a prison, rejecting Shakti. And so these defective men, instead of trying to improve themselves, they all decided to support this growing disease, this cancer upon the world, because of the false power that it gave them, because of the false authority that it gave them. And this strain of weakness, which is present in the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, the Islamic tradition, it has infected nearly everything, including so-called secular cultures which still rely upon slave morality and petty legalism in order to hold together civil institutions that possess no real connection to authority because they have been absolutely severed from the gods. What we have now in modernity is the worship of weakness. It is the squandering of beauty and the continued debasement of the divine feminine, as well as the continued degeneration of the divine masculine. And so now we have reached a point in history where we have to decide, are we going to continue to worship weakness, or are we going to take a stand as individuals, as strong men and women who are ready to reject the degeneracy of Yahweh? If you are willing to take a stand, to stand on your own 2 feet and embrace strength, this is how you combat the magic of Yahweh. First, you have to be willing to crawl through the barbed wire. This system, the global system that we exist within, that was born from the cult of Yahweh, has many, many traps in place. And it is sentient. The system itself, it has a mind, it has a spirit, it has a body, it has emotions. It's all linked to this one figure, Yahweh. If you are going to fight the system, you have to be ready to experience great pain and hardship. Every man and woman who has stood against this system in a significant way has suffered. And that is because this system will fight back. So if you want to be a master of the self, you have to be ready to accept the pain and suffering that comes with that responsibility of being strong, of being willful. Along with the physical pain, the hardship that you can be placed within, you have to be ready to be demonized. From an esoteric standpoint, all of the angels in heaven that rebelled against Yahweh, they were demonized. They were shown to be evil to the people. Their reputation was destroyed. But what does it mean to be a demon? The demon has embraced their differentiated beauty in opposition to the tyranny of Yahweh. And so you have to be ready to wear your bad reputation as a badge of honor. Because If you stand against this system, if you truly stand against this system, your reputation will be under attack. You will scare those people who remain within the system. People will resent you. Weak people who can't do what you are willing to do. There's a reason why demons appear in frightening forms. They exist without connection to the system. They exist on the fringes, on the outsides, on the outskirts of society. And anything that exists on the outskirts, anything that exists within the wilderness is inherently terrifying to those who remain within the confines of the farm, of the prison. So you have to be willing to appear terrifying, to appear threatening, to appear strange. And you have to embrace that. Make it a source of power. Now, let's talk about specific institutions that have come about as a result of the cult of Yahweh and how you can start to escape them. Most of us have already participated in these institutions. But I will say right off the bat that if you have not yet participated in these institutions, do everything in your power to avoid them. Because one of the primary modes of magic that is practiced by Yahweh is the binding spell. And the binding spell requires some voluntary action on the part of the individual that is bound. When you participate in these systems willfully, you are bringing yourself under the influence of Yahweh. There is an esoteric element to all of these systems, even if they claim to be secular. If we can trace the foundation of those systems back to Yahweh, His presence is there, spiritually. And participation in these systems will poison you spiritually. The first institution that you must be wary of is marriage. Now, marriage was part of the pagan world. It is an Aryan tradition. But legalistic marriage, as it exists within modernity, as it exists now, is purely Abrahamic. The involvement of the state, the modern state, in marriage severs the connection with the gods. It is a ritual that binds the divine feminine into submission and places the divine masculine in a degenerated position of false authority. This is why so many weak men are quick to try to convince a woman to marry them right off the bat so that they can legally bind them. They are casting their own binding spell on Shakti in the form of this woman who has become an object of their affection. And so, involving the state, and all modern states can be traced back to the cult of Yahweh, involving the state in your romantic relationship brings Yahweh into your life, brings the spirit of that system into your romantic relationship. And there are many incentives that are given to individuals who participate in legalistic marriage. And these are bribes, Because that's another thing that Yahweh loves to do. He loves to bribe people, just like he bribed the Jews when they were in slavery. So you have to be very careful about participating in this institution. Usury and the banking system. The modern banking system is another form of binding magic. The system of usurious debt is a way to bring the Aryan spirit into submission and to force the people into a condition where they are held in bondage to the will of the system. When you enter into debt, it is a magic ritual. It is a rite. It is a binding spell. You are placing yourself under the will of this institution that once again can be traced directly back to the cult of Yahweh. And anyone in modernity who has made an effort to attack the banking system or to create an alternative to the banking system has been demonized, has been targeted, their reputation has been destroyed, and they have been oftentimes physically destroyed. The banking system is very important in the preservation of the cult of Yahweh. And even if Christianity is destroyed, Judaism is destroyed, Islam is destroyed, and the influence of these religions is thrown out, if the banking system, if the usurious banking system continues, then the cult of Yahweh remains strong. So we have to find new ways to operate outside of the banking system. And there are many potential options for that. But just know that those who seek a political solution within the system to overturn the banking system, they will be destroyed. There is no political solution within the system because the rules have been set by the cult. So, you have to find ways to keep yourself out of debt. Any way that you can. And if you are in debt, you have to find ways to get out of debt or find ways to not pay the debt back. Now, I'm not going to talk about specifics on how you can do this, but if you use your imagination and you do a little research, you can find a way. The political system. I just mentioned there's no political solution within the system. And that is because, once again, the political system is a binding ritual. When you vote, you are participating in a magic ritual. There are esoteric aspects to voting. You are actually giving your power, giving your prana to the political system when you cast your vote. You are giving legitimacy to the church of politics. And of course, politics doesn't deal with the full expression of the cosmos. It doesn't deal with the Aryan spirit because it is limited to the material realm in its function, and the only connection it has to spirit is Yahweh. Because all modern political institutions can be traced back to the esoteric legalism of Yahwism. So stop voting. Stop giving your power to politicians. Stop thinking that a politician is going to save you. A politician isn't going to do shit for you. If the politician works within the system, they are just a cog in the machine. That is all they are. No political movement is going to save you. The only thing that is going to save you is the revitalization of the healthy solar aspect, which is following the black sun. If you can identify the black sun and you can follow an aspect of the black sun and put your energy towards that, you will see a revitalization of the gods on this earth, and you will see humanity flourish once again out from under the boot of oppression of Yahweh. But if you continue to give your energy, your psychic energy, your physical energy, all of it to the political system, you're doing no one a favor except for that bastard Yahweh. So take political movements out of your mind. Stop watching the news. Stop participating. The only time you should be watching the news, the only time you should bring your attention towards the media is when you're applying a critical eye to see what kind of manipulation they're doing, what kind of spells they're casting. But be aware of the fact that the media is casting spells on you all of the time. They are conducting yoga nidra on you through the media. It is hypnosis. They are mesmerizing you. So that's another thing you need to be very wary of. You need to separate yourself from those institutions that are brainwashing you. Yoga nidra can be used to empower, but it can also be used to enslave. And that's what these media organizations are doing. They know how to get you into a meditative state. They know how to lull you into a condition where you will be susceptible to suggestion. And the only way to keep yourself from being in that suggestible state is to remove yourself. Remove yourself completely from their field of view. Don't give them your time. Find your news, find your information from people who are explicitly anti-system. Now I'm going to talk about the pitfalls with controlled opposition in just a moment. But if you can find someone who is truly fighting against the system, who can interpret the news and provide it to you in a way where it's not designed to mesmerize you, it's not designed to sell you a product, it's not designed to break your will or convince you of some false hope, that's who you should be giving your attention to. And that is an aspect of the black sun. Church, this almost goes without saying, but don't attend a church that developed from the cult of Yahweh, because you are literally going into their temple, which is charged by the prana of their cult. And just being within that building is going to have an influence over you unless you can put up the proper barriers. But also, being in attendance is giving everyone around you the sense that they are part of a living tradition. They are part of a growing cult. And the presence of churches all over the place. And I've seen so many goddamn churches all over the United States. In the past year, we traveled from Missouri to Denver, all the way across the United States to the East Coast, up to Massachusetts. And in every state, there were churches everywhere. Everywhere. And these churches, even to those who don't attend the church, they represent power. The fact that these churches are in these communities, they are pillars of power. And they radiate power. So don't support the churches. Don't give your money to the churches. If there's an organization that directs resources to any of these churches, whether it's Christian, Islamic, Jewish, whatever, if it has anything to do with the cult of Yahweh, don't support it. Don't attend their functions. Nothing. No energy directed towards these temples. Taxation. Well, of course, if you don't want to support the political system because the political system is part of your oppression and it is part of the cult of Yahweh, you obviously don't want to be paying taxes. Now, if you just stop paying your taxes immediately, you're probably going to go to prison. But there are ways around the system. There are loopholes. There are places you can go still in this world where you can escape from the slavery of taxation. No Aryan system requires taxation. A true leader should be able to garner support voluntarily. If a man or a woman cannot get people to follow them voluntarily, they are not worthy of power. They are living in a degenerated state. And so, any system that is supported by taxation is a broken, degenerated system. And you should not consider it a source of healthy rebellion against the cult of Yahweh. No taxation. Fiat money. This just goes along with the banking system. Part of the magic of Yahweh is imagination. Yahweh is a Vishuddhi entity, and we are living in a Vishuddhi age. And part of Vishuddhi magic is manifestation through ideation. So if you are operating within the Vishuddhi and you want to influence your environment, what you do is you create a matrix. You create a matrix of ideas, and then you convince other people to give their power to that matrix. You convince them to follow along, to play pretend with you, essentially. But it's not just pretend, because it becomes real when weight is placed behind it. When people put their energy into this idea, it manifests in the material world. And that is what our entire monetary system is based upon in modernity. It is fiat exchange. The money is no longer even tied to the earth. It's not tied to gold anymore. It's not tied to raw materials. It's just playing pretend. The money is just pretend. The banking system is playing pretend. Democracy, it's just playing pretend. And as soon as we stop playing pretend, all of the power that was siphoned into that system is drained immediately. You want to talk about draining the swamp? The way you drain the swamp is stop playing along with bullshit. It's all bullshit. You can't drain the swamp if you yourself are playing pretend. If you run for the presidency and you participate in the system, you are in the system. You're not draining anything. So just stop playing along. And yeah, you might be forced into the system, but you don't have to give it any weight. If someone is forcing you to play a game, you don't have to put any sort of enthusiasm into it. Do the bare minimum to get by until you can get out. Because your enthusiasm, which can develop as part of Stockholm Syndrome, playing this pretend game with the government or with a church, this is giving energy to the system. So be as lazy as possible within the system. Work your ass off outside of the system. Work hard to free yourself. But do the bare minimum when it comes to interacting with the system. The legal system. As I said, the law is very important to the cult of Yahweh. The binding of Shakti relies upon these legal institutions. The formation of the law was the foundation of Shakti in chains. And so if you're going to fight the magic of Yahweh, you have to totally reject the law. The law carries no weight. It's just playing pretend. First off, you have to realize that you have no rights. Your rights are fake. It's playing pretend. You have to develop master morality. You have to look beyond the petty legalism of good and evil. There is no good and evil. There is only what is good for you and what is bad for you. There is what is dharmic for you and what is adharmic for you. And the legal system creates the illusion that what is good and bad for you can be defined by other people, who can then force you to conform to that standard. And who set that standard? Well, if we trace it all the way back to its foundation, it's Yahweh. And his poisonous fingers can still be seen in the morality that is embraced not only by Christians and Muslims and Jews, but also atheists who pretend to be outside of that system, but more often than not, they embrace the same slave morality. They embrace petty legalism as a way to interact with one another, as a way to bind the culture together. Instead of dharma, instead of recognizing individuated beauty and elevating people towards the gods, what we have is some asshole lawyer telling you how to live and changing the rules at will. Because of course there is no true foundation to your rights. There is no true foundation to the law. It's just at the whims of those who happen to be in a position of authority. The priesthood of Yahweh. So, what do we do about this? Well, if the law is a binding spell, and if it gives power to Yahweh and his priesthood, the best thing you can do is practice civil disobedience. Civil disobedience as often as you can. Any opportunity you have to practice civil disobedience in a way that won't destroy you, because you don't want to become self-destructive. That's one of the traps. But practicing civil disobedience is key, not just to making change in our current dimension of consciousness, but in the wider expression of the cosmos. Developing that rebellious spirit, embracing it, taking action, direct action, every chance you can get. When it benefits you and the people you love, you should take those actions and you should not feel guilty about it. Because as I said, all of these laws, all of these ideas about objective morality, it's all bullshit. It's all playing pretend. Don't be bound by all of this nonsense, this illusion that's been placed upon you. It's only limiting you, placing you in chains. Don't think that the system's going to take care of you when you're old either. It's just another bribe. When the system comes to you and offers you aid when you are down, when you're suffering, when you're in poverty, take it. Take what they have and run. Don't say thank you to the system. Never view the system in a positive light. Because remember, when Yahweh came to the Jews in slavery, he did not have their best interest in mind. He placed them in a new condition of slavery. The Jews were not liberated by Yahweh. They were made slaves. They are victims of Yahweh. I have heard so many stories from Christians who have told me that there was a moment in their life when they were at their darkest, when they were at their lowest point. Someone they loved died. They became an alcoholic. They lost their home. And then God came to them at that moment and offered them a way out. But it wasn't a way out. It was a trick. It is so insidious that Yahweh and his minions will come to people in their darkest hour, take the chains off their feet, and immediately put new chains on their wrists. They're not elevating anyone. It is just a new condition of slavery. And it's sad and pathetic, because a true liberator wants to see you live with no chains, in absolute freedom to pursue your individuated nature, your beauty, your dharma, to elevate you to the condition of brotherhood with the gods, brotherhood with one another. And this is not what is offered by the cult of Yahweh. No matter what tricky language they use, no matter what petty legalism they apply. Now, when you find your way out of the system, it's important that you participate in an adversarial counterculture, because there is strength in numbers. We are social beings. We need one another. We complement one another. We might come into conflict every once in a while because we possess our own individuated natures and we're all different. And by that very definition, there's going to be a point where we're not going to agree. But we can recognize strength in one another and recognize that we have something beautiful to offer one another. And the black sun exists within us. And the more of us that come together, the more powerful that sun becomes. It grows in size. And it eclipses the degenerated sun. And it becomes the new order. Now, when you participate in an adversarial counterculture, you have to be careful that you do not fall into one of the traps that has been set by the cult of Yahweh, and that is controlled opposition. There are many, many booby traps that have been set. Thelema, for example. Crowley was not the great beast. He was literally a man that was angelically possessed, and he was a slave to Yahweh. And that cult is a degenerated Yahweh cult that enslaves women and ultimately sacrifices them to Yahweh. It is not a source of opposition. The Gnostic cults that are forming, that are fighting the demiurge, they are not presenting a pathway to the Aryan gods, which are the gods that exist for us to live in affirmation of life in this moment, in this dimension. They are not presenting that pathway. It is just another form of Yahwism. There are satanic organizations, like the Temple of Satan. The Satanic Temple. These organizations are presenting the same type of secular slave morality that you find in so many other places within modernity. They are not a true source of opposition. There are political organizations that form that do not offer the pathway to the gods. There is only one pathway to the gods. That is the traditional embrace of the Aryan system, the true caste system, as it existed in its original form, as it existed in its original formulation. That is the only path. The path of Dharma, to realize your nature and to express it. That is the path of opposition. And in our current age, there is only one true source of opposition. That is the black sun. The true black sun. The black sun is the usurper, the solar aspect in divine union with the Earth Mother, with Shakti. The healthy divine masculine in alignment, in unification, in yoga with the healthy divine feminine. If you can find that source of unification, if you can reach the black sun, that ultimately is your key to defeating the magic of Yahweh.